Hi everybody, thank you for tuning in and thank you for your participation on Facebook. Your votes indicate that image C, the photograph of the sulfur mine at the top of the crater rim, is the one that most of you want me to talk about or to discuss in this video. So, let's get to it. The photograph was taken at a place called the Ijen Crater in East Java, Indonesia. The crater belongs to an active volcano which constantly spews out sulfuric fumes. At this particular place, the fumes are channeled through man-made pipes. As they pass through the pipes, they become liquid, and eventually, the liquid turns to hardened sulfur. And the sulfur is collected, or mined, by men from the villages that surround Ijen. Men just like the one in the photograph that we're discussing. In fact, this is him here, not long after that image was taken. It's worth mentioning that the working conditions at Ijen Crater are some of the most difficult and harsh working conditions in the entire world. The sulfuric fumes are toxic. Inhaling them makes you want to cough, cry, and vomit, all at the same time. Metal rods in their bare hands are the only tools that the miners have at their disposal. They'll load the broken down pieces of sulfur into bamboo baskets. Some of these can weigh up to 100 kilos. They carry the baskets to the base. The way is long and arduous. The surface is slippery and rocky. A step in the wrong direction here can mean death. The man in the photograph that we'll be discussing is one of a few hundred men that work at Ijen Crater. His name is Paying, and over my few days at Ijen, he became my friend. I met Paying in the darkness of a very early morning during my first descent to the vent. Actually, my wife and I got lost on our way down there. Paying showed us the way using the very same flame that you see in this photograph for illumination. It's the same flame that he has in the photograph that we're discussing. The reason that we were up and about so early was that I wanted to be at the vent before sunrise, to see what the locals called the blue flame. The reason that Paying and other workers were up so early was that they wanted to avoid working in the heat of the scorching sun. It was a nice coincidence that I was exposed to the dramatic lighting effect of the flame torches. In a sense, it inspired the latter photograph. And this is the benefit of shooting in the same place for a few days. You get ideas for interesting stories and images. There's also a great benefit in having a good relationship with your subject. In a sense, your subject can collaborate with you and help you bring those ideas, those visions that you might have in your mind to life. This photograph is certainly the result of shooting for a few days and me having been friends with Paying. After being exposed to the dramatic lighting effect of the flame torches and being exposed to Paying's daily routine, a part of which included a rest stop at the top of the crater rim, I came up with the idea to create an environmental portrait of him, which would be atmospheric and would tell us about his surroundings, as well as hint at what he does. While we're talking about how this image came to be, let's have a look at some of the other photographs that led to the chosen image. That morning I took quite a few of them, experimenting, looking for different angles, waiting for different expressions and gestures. The first reason that my subject, Paying, was a collaborator with me on this image is because I asked him to sit in a particular spot where the background would be most dramatic. He was going to take his rest anyway, but I just wanted to make sure that he'd take it in the perfect spot for my photograph. The other reason has to do with the light and the time of the day that the image was taken. Unless they forget, the men extinguish their flame torches at the first break of daylight. But if I was to photograph Paying in complete darkness, I would have too much contrast between the flame-lit areas and the dark background. I wouldn't be able to see anything of his surroundings. I asked Paying to keep the flame going, and he did. This image is just after he lit another cigarette with it. As a result, I ended up with a perfect lighting scenario. The pleasant warm light of the flame torch in Paying's face, and enough light in the background to show Paying's dramatic surroundings. You can see here that I'm getting closer to the perfect angle. Eventually I find it, and I wait for just the right moment to make the photograph, or a moment that stands out in some way. This moment happens as another sulfur miner passes by Paying. I catch him just as he walks out of the scene. His figure going into the distance with the baskets over the shoulder is indicative of what Paying might be doing with the baskets that he's currently sitting on. If I didn't get another photograph, I'd be happy with this image. However, I'm not completely satisfied with the fact that too much of Paying's face is in the dark and his eyes don't have that catchlight in them. Luckily, I got what I wanted in the next photograph, so that's the one that I chose. I think that all the elements are in place here. Of course, you don't always know that you got the image at the time of the shoot, so you kept shooting. As you can see, I got a couple more photographs from exactly the same position, and I got another couple from a different angle. I'm actually quite happy with the last two, but I feel that the image with a sulfur miner walking into the distance just works a little bit better. The one last thing to mention is that I used a tripod while taking this photograph, as I wanted to keep the ISO down. I shot this on a Canon 5D Mark I, which produces a considerable amount of grain and noise at higher ISO levels. And so with a lower ISO value, the shutter speed value had to go down too. It was set at 1/25th of a second. In order to avoid blurriness, out came the tripod. That was the story behind how the photograph was actually taken. But to me, virtually no photograph is complete until it's been post-processed. I do most of my post-processing in Lightroom, so let's go into Lightroom and have a look at what I've done with this photograph. Rather than work in reverse order and deconstruct the image, I'd like to take you through the steps that I actually did in order to create the photograph that I ended up with. Let's start off by going into full screen mode to avoid distractions. And I know that a lot of you might be interested in the EXIF data for this photograph, so let me bring that up as well. As you can see, I shot at 1/25th of a second, f2.8, ISO 800. Remember, I wanted to keep it low. I couldn't really go much lower than that. And I was on the 24mm end of my 24-70mm lens. The thing to start off with in this particular case is actually the camera profile. This image was taken with what is now a pretty old camera, the Canon 5D Mark I, so the profile actually has some significance. Right now it's set on Adobe Standard, which makes everything look very red and actually very unrealistic, not how I remember the scene. So let me just change it back to ACR 4.4, and now I'm already much closer to the image that I want. Next, we want to make some global adjustments, and let's begin with the ones right at the top. The temperature slider here is a little bit too far to the right, so I'm going to move it a little bit over here, set it to around 4600 or so. This makes the image look a little bit cooler overall. The tint is also, I'd say it's a little bit too far on the purple pinkish side, and I want to bring that back to this side and just get rid of that pinky tint to it. Next, we're going to go to this set of sliders right here. First of all, I'm going to change the value of the shadow slide. I'll bring that all the way to the right side and set it around, let's say plus 62. I'll move the highlight slide a little bit to the left so as to have some detail in the brighter areas. I'm going to adjust the whites just a little bit, and then I'll move on to clarity. I don't like to adjust clarity too much, so I'm just going to move the slider to about plus 9. Pretty happy with that. Next, we move on to the tone curve, and this is where I do quite a few adjustments. The first thing that I do is I move this slider all the way here and move the shadow slider a little bit to the left. I can achieve a very similar effect by adjusting the black slider, but for whatever reason I prefer to do it here. I also sometimes move this slider all the way to this side and adjust the highlights. Then we'll adjust the lights just a little bit, as well as the darks. I tweak around with these settings and experiment until I actually get the effect that I'm looking for. So for instance here, I might bring the lights back a little bit, and I'm a little more happy with that image. Let's move on now to what some might consider the more tricky part of post-processing, and that's local adjustments with the adjustment brush tool, the shortcut for which is K on the keyboard. So let's select that, and the first thing I like to do is adjust the clarity in certain elements within the photograph in order to make them more prominent, to stand out more. The first area where I like to do this is around the eyes and certain facial features. And in these cases I don't bring the clarity up too high, so I'll bring it up to about 20 or so, and let's get to it. I paint right around the areas which I want to be featured more prominently, which I want to stand out. So here I'm painting inside of the eyes and the mouth. One important thing that I like to do is exit and re-enter the adjustment brush tool again in order to create a new pin like this. So now if I paint here, you can see that I've got a new pin, or whatever you call these things. And what this allows me to do is adjust the clarity only for this new part of the image. So for instance, you can see here, this is just to show you the differences, that I've adjusted the clarity all the way to 100, and it's different from the value that I have here. It's still at 21. So let me get back to this part here and bring it back down to, let's say, 20, and I'm going to paint a little bit more. I'm going to exit and enter the adjustment brush tool again, and I'm going to paint right around here, around the hand, around this hand and the flame, a little bit around Ping's scarf, and again I'm going to exit and enter the adjustment brush tool, and I'm going to increase that value just a little bit because I'm going to paint in some larger objects like this mountain. So I want some of those crevices to stand out a little bit more. Then I want this sulfur miner to be featured a little bit more prominently too, so I'm going to paint right around him. Another thing is that I'd like the basket to stand out a little bit more. I'll paint around there too, as well as around Ping's boots and a little bit on the ground. And let me just zoom out. Now the last thing I'd like to do is I'd like to brighten the darker side of Ping's face just a little bit, so I'm going to zoom into it, and again out comes the adjustment brush. I'm going to set this value to 0, but I'm going to bring up the shadows value a little bit, and I'm going to paint right around the darker part of his face. I'm going to zoom out, and let's see, before and after. You can see that now that darker part of the face just looks a little bit brighter, and that's exactly what I've wanted. Zoom out one more time, and that's it. That's pretty much the image that I'm happy with. If you have any suggestions or any feedback for this video, feel free to leave your comments on my blog, on Facebook, or here in YouTube. I'm curious to know what you all think. So thank you once again for tuning in, and goodbye.